Hello everyone, and welcome to our stock comparison guide tutorial. My name is Ann Cunez. I'll be your host for this evening. And our main presenter will be Susie Artsberger. She is our Director of Information Technology. She's our product manager for all of the online tools. She's basically our authority, our leading authority, our best authority for all things on the online tools. So without further ado, Susie, we might as well get going and talk about Stock Comparison Guide.
Great. I'd love to. Thank you, Anne, for that kind introduction. Thank you, everyone who is attending tonight, and especially a good thank you to our backroom staff that helps us produce these webinars and makes it so that we can put them on every week, it seems like, right? So I'm going to get going. We've got a lot to cover tonight. And we present our standard disclaimer to remind you to always do your own research. Tonight we will be looking at some actual stocks and future judgments or projections for those stocks, but these are samples for demonstration purposes only. This session will be recorded for future use in case you miss any part of it or wish to review it again later. I'll also remind everyone that there are handouts in the control panel if you want to download those and refer to them during the session or later on. In tonight's webinar, we're going to be going over basically the key operations in the tool. Before we do that, I'll give you a general overview of the stock comparison guide and what it's intended to do. Anne did a webinar just 1 week ago, however, in our Stock Up series that talked all about using the stock comparison guide conceptually to select the best stocks. She did use the tool or showed the tool in some screenshots, but she talked in some detail about what each of the criteria could do for you in helping use the tool. Tonight, we're not going to be so much with all of these different criteria and what's better or what's worse. I'm going to show you how to make your way around the tool. How to start a comparison guide, how to save a comparison guide, and so forth. Talk about notes and printing. So basically the nuts and bolts of the tool itself. Now if you have questions as we go along, please submit them using the question panel. And I'll remind you that we'll have a recording up. We put it up on our YouTube channel. Usually it's in a day, but I'll promise 2 to 4 days. So let's get started with the stock comparison guide tool. Now this is a tool that's been around in our community for actually quite a long time. This is the online version of it. We've had an online stock comparison guide since 2007. This version that you're looking at today is new as of late last fall, and we've added a few things since then. So I'll be going over, just everything new here. But this is the basic view of our tool. And the big takeaway right here is that we are looking at 5 different companies, and you'll see them across the top. And then on this left side here are a number of different criteria in rows. So very much a table-based approach. And as I said, the webinar that was held a week ago really went through each of these criteria and taught, how to look at those criteria. We're going to be talking more about, what's clickable, what does it do for you, what does this highlighting mean, how to click it on and off, and so forth. So this is just a picture of it. And then when we get into the tool, basically, you're looking at 5 different areas, and they are logically grouped into growth comparisons, management comparisons, valuation, potential return, and other. And the general idea is that you work your way through the tool, selecting the best from each line. Now that's kind of a fuzzy concept, but I'll explain as we go, and the detail is in that other webinar. Many times the stock that has the most selections, and we have a little counter, ends up being the winner. There's a couple different ways to look at it, but that's the general gist of it. So one thing that's important to note is that we typically go into a comparison guide from a completed stock selection guide with judgments. So I'll say typical because I'm going to show you an alternative route uh, later. But this is typically what you do. You work in one of the online tools, CoreSSG or SSGPlus, create your stock selection guide. Within that stock selection guide, you make your judgments, and then you save the stock selection guide. I'll point out right now that there may be people in our audience that use our older desktop tool, which is called Toolkit. It also has a stock comparison guide, but the two systems don't talk to each other. So for the online comparison guide, you need to have a study that already exists in our database. Then, once you have those studies, you move them to the stock comparison guide, create it, and save it, and do your comparisons. So that's the process flow, typical process flow. Now, again, to reiterate, the data for these comparisons comes from your completed SSGs. To get the most bang for the buck, be sure your SSGs are current. If you're trying to do a comparison guide on data that's 2 years old, it's not going to be that valuable as if it were current data. So before you start this process, either use a recently created study or update your studies with updated price and fundamental data so that you have the recent quarterly data and prices, and then use them in the comparison guide. You may also want to review your judgments, because if you are working with an older study and some things may have happened to that company, either their growth, for example, their growth rates may have accelerated or decelerated, they may have, the market may have responded optimistically or pessimistically, changing the PE situation a little bit. So make sure your judgments are up to date, and that's how you get the most bang for your buck. So those are some overarching concepts. And then finally, when you use it in the most common way, I'll call it the basic or best way, we typically want to compare stocks that are in a same or pretty similar industry. Sometimes due to differences in classification systems, you think some companies are very much alike, but they're not technically in the same industry. That's okay. But wildly dissimilar is not a common usage. So the basic usage here is to do your comparison with the same or similar industry, and it helps to have those SSGs created in a similar manner. Meaning, if I create a very aggressive SSG and I stack it up next to a company, let's say Ann and I are in the same club, and she does a very conservative SSG, then we're going to get results that are a little bit skewed. So if you have two or more people creating SSGs that are going to come together into a comparison guide, spend a little time and make sure that they're prepared a little in a similar manner, that they're not wildly aggressive or extremely conservative. So that's how you, this is the basic way we're going to use it. There are some others. So we talked about this, the basic way where you're going to compare companies in the same industry, and you're going to highlight the best on each row in order to select the best company. One other way that I will show you today, and I used it in preparation for this webinar, is adding companies in the same industry without completing the judgments. And I wanted to compare some basic things in order to narrow down my list to 5. So there is a way now that you can just add a company directly to the comparison guide and very quickly see if it should be in or out. So I'll show you that too. Contrarian, I've used this in the past where I have put companies in the comparison guide and I have actually selected the ones that were the worst in each row in order to highlight the companies to remove. Sometimes you get a set of companies that are pretty close, and it helps to remove the one that's obviously a non-starter. So a couple different ways to think about using the table-based approach and comparison-based approach that we're going to see. Now, in the advent of all of the online e-commerce that we have going on, you've probably seen online comparisons before, like computer websites have them, um, consumer reports. You can stack things up to compare. So you'll see this concept quite a bit, and same thing. And again, I'm going to point out that the webinar that Ann did a week ago, which was the Stock Up webinar for April, is listed on our website under the Stock Up archive. So you're going to go to Tools and Resources and then click on Stock Up and then go down to Archives, and it's the most recent one, selecting the best using the stock comparison guide. So if you have a question as we go along tonight, write it in, and if the staff feels it's appropriate that you should review that other webinar, they'll let you know. So moving on. Tonight we're going to be looking at some real companies. I just did this today. I pulled these companies today. And this is who they are. They are all small companies from the technology sector in the application software industry. For your reference, and as you're in the handouts as well, I have pre-made some judgments. So we're not doing a stock selection guide and developing a stock selection guide during this time. We're going to concentrate on the tool. Nevertheless, these are the judgments that I used. How did I get them? I did what we call a quick and dirty SSG. So when it says determined by staff, yeah, that's just me doing the quick and dirty SSG. Coincidentally, we've got some companies that, I just put in or seem to have the same kind of growth rates. I didn't realize that till I was making this table, but that's the way it is. And let's talk a little bit right now about these companies in case you're interested. Being interested in these companies is fine. Don't go out and buy them. Don't think that this first company is going to have a 16% growth rate in the future. Again, this is my quick and dirty judgment numbers. So our first company is Tyler Technologies, and they provide IT solutions, software services in areas of operations for cities, counties, schools, and other local government entities. Another very similar company is ticker eGov, also called NIC, and they provide IT solutions, software, and services to governments as well. And these are things, both of these companies provide things like online ticket paying, online Secretary of State or motor vehicle functions, e-commerce, so you pay and get your license plate or registration online, that kind of thing. So they are actually very, very similar companies. Our third company is Manhattan Associates, and they are a little bit different product. They're a very similar size. They develop, sell, and maintain software for supply chain, inventory management, operations for retailers, wholesalers, and so forth. The fourth one is ticker ANSS, which is ANSYS, and they develop engineering software and services used by engineers, designers, and so forth in a lot of different industries, academia, aerospace, automotive, and so forth. The last company, NICE Industries, is they provide what they call enterprise level solutions that make use of big data. This is where they're collecting all kinds of data, like from phone calls, from website usage, from internal interactions between computer systems of their clients. And they provide a way to search and operationalize and use that data to help those companies get better at the thing that they're doing. So those could be customer interactions, financial crime, compliance, businesses, that kind of thing. Again, a similar size. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, before we go live, do we have any outstanding questions, Anne?
No, not at this point. We're
Okay.
ready. We're ready to go into the tool.
Awesome. Let's do that. Let's go live to our stock comparison guide. Actually, the first thing that we're going to do is go live to our website and get that going here. Let me switch over to our member website. So if this doesn't look familiar to you, we have two scenarios. Either you're not a member, which is really sad. You need to become a member because we have so much stuff for you. Or you haven't visited our homepage recently, which is something you really ought to do. So in addition to all of the cool tools and resources, here's our stock up webinars, our first cut, and so forth. This is the primary way that people access our tools, the green box in the upper right-hand corner. So if you want to, go to your list of created studies or compare stocks, this is where you would go. To get at these tools, you would need to have what we call a core membership or a plus membership, or be in an investment club and get the core upgrade or plus upgrade. So assuming you have all that, and I certainly do, let's go ahead and compare stocks. And this is one of the ways we can get to our stock comparison guide. If I click here, then it will open into this view of a blank stock comparison guide. So remember that screenshot I showed you before. Here's an unfilled out one, if you will. So what do we do here? This is what the webinar is all about. Once you're here, I'm going to point a few things out. On the left, these are the tabs to get to our whole tool set. So if you want to go, this is a home button, you can mouse over and see what they do. My studies are all my saved studies. Here's our screener tab or stock ideas tab. If you're going to do a stock selection guide, this will be highlighted in green and a different view will come up. This is our stock comparison guide. So if you're already in the tool doing something else, hit the SCG button to get right here. And then we have a information, help and information tab. So I'm here, and what I want to do is start a comparison guide. So we're going to take a look at some of our options up top. Actually, what I have is a drop down. I notice first, it says new comparison, or if I click on it, I can see all of my saved comparisons. So I have a couple of ones that I created recently in preparation for tonight. I could choose any one of these and open up something I've already saved. This was one that I did about a year ago, and see, it comes right back up. This was another one that I did today, and that comes right back up. So that's one of the key things that we have going for us, is that we can save a comparison and call it back up later for future review. What if we want to start one fresh? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the column here. Remember, we're going to fill out 5 columns worth of information, and I have a couple of options. If I click in the box, nothing seems to happen. If I click on this button with the ellipses, what I see are a list of my most recently saved studies, and I can scroll down through those. So that's very cool. So let me pick Tyler. That's one I did today in preparation. Boom, that information comes up. What does this box do for us? Well, the box is what we call an autocomplete. And I can start typing in that box and say, what was that other one? eGov. And I start typing the ticker, and it brings up all of the studies that I have created under that name. So here's the one I know. It's dated today. It says SCG. Boom. I can add it like that. Again, if I go back to the ellipses, I can see a couple of other options here. So we're starting to just basically add companies to our comparison guide. One of the things I want to point out right away is we have a little remove or delete or trash can icon here. If you make a mistake when adding, all I need to do is click that. Boom, it's gone. If I want to re-add it, I can repick it. Now this is typical where you're going to create your stock selection guides. These are ordered by the date that you did them, so the ones that you recently did are at the top of the list. So I'm going to add all of the 5 that I talked about earlier just by going through my recent studies here. Nice, and Manhattan Associates, and there we have. We have a fully populated comparison guide. So it starts getting a little busy up top here. Let me see if I can blow that up while I talk to you about that. What we have on top is the company name, an underlined stock selection guide study name, small. You might say, why are they're small? These are what that means is these are small sized companies. That's all. And then the industry in which they operate. So this is the application software industry. Sectors are a little too big if we're going to compare companies in the same sector. And so we're going to, we're really concerned with industry. That's why that's listed here. We have that delete or remove button I talked about, and then we have a couple other things that I will talk about in a few minutes. So that is what's going on with our header. And if I, at this point, I can choose to continue on with what I'm doing, or I might say, these are the companies I want to go for. I'm going to save my comparison. So to do that, we see a little, amazingly, a floppy disk icon. Some people will recognize as our save item. You can always mouse over and get a better idea of what's going on here. So I can save that comparison. And by default, it's going to give me a list of the tickers that are inside of the comparison. I can erase that. I can say this is my SCG tutorial software study and say OK. Then we see those words up here. Now let me kind of show you, I have another, let me go back to a test I did today. And if I open that, I get a different, well, I was playing with these companies, so they're actually very similar. Let me show you some other things that I can do, though. I can rename it, and maybe I'll put my own name in there. I can rename my comparisons with these buttons at the top here. I can delete this comparison entirely. And the way to do that is to open it and then hit delete. Boom. It says, do you want to? Yes, I do. And we're done. So then I would need to repick. And I can repick and reopen the one I just saved, which is this one. So those are your 3 buttons here. A way for saving, renaming, deleting, and picking anything that's already been saved. Okay. So we're back here and let's take a look at the main display. We talked about the tabs on the left, which lead us to other tools. We've got our tabular display in row and column format. That doesn't change. One thing I want to point out here is it says Core at the top. We have 2 views now of our stock comparison guide. So the Core view is a very streamlined view. And then we have a Plus view. I will go there later. Plus has more criteria. If you are a Toolkit user, it has everything that Toolkit has, plus some. So that's what, and when I do that later, I'll point it out again, but this will change to Plus. So we have 25 different criteria here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit and show you another feature. One of the cool things is that we have a floating header. So the list of criteria can get long, especially if you're using the Plus view, but no matter where you are, the header will float. So we have these 5 sections that I mentioned before, growth, appropriately labeled, and a section down at the bottom that has just some other types of data that you may find useful. One of the things that the tool does, if you'd like to work on one section at a time, I'm going to point out these little triangles here. The double triangle will close up and collapse each one of these sections. Any single triangle will toggle open and closed. So I can toggle them all open, I can close them selectively, and so forth. So if I were to toggle them all closed, then I could like focus and start here on the growth comparisons. If that makes it easier in the way that you learn and work your way through the tool, that is available to you. So I'm going to open them all up, and we'll take a look at something. Somebody asked a question about what does count mean, and count is related to these green highlighting. You might see that some companies are highlighted, some companies are not. By default, the first time you come into the tool, we apply what we call default highlighting. And highlighting is in green. And then what on selected rows, we will by default highlight the best, and it's usually a pretty simple algorithm. So for growth rate, the best one is the biggest one. We'll do that for sales and earnings. Then we will look that we don't actually highlight anything on pre-tax profit sales because that probably needs a little more in-depth analysis. We'll look at the lowest present price. We'll highlight the ones that are buys. We'll highlight the one with the biggest upside downside ratio, and so forth. If that seems a little overarching and not the way you want to do things, that's fine. We've got some options for you. So let's start looking at some of those top menu items. Under Tools up here, I can clear all of the highlighting, and it's all gone. You can use the tool to your liking now and just highlight the things that you like without using our default algorithms. If you want to go back and see what they were, you can restore those defaults. Boom, and they come back. So those are, turn on, turn off. If you have a preference where you never want to see automatic highlighting, just uncheck the automatic highlighting and you'll be all set. Okay, so the highlighting has been cleared. I've set my default, and let's kind of show you how the process works in the middle of our table here. So the idea is we're going to go down through each row and evaluate the data the criteria that's there and the data that each company brings to the table. So for example, the first one looks at 10-year sales growth rate. And I like growing companies. I would love to think that a couple of these would meet my criteria. Now, these are all small companies, so I would expect kind of a robust growth rate. And I might highlight one, you might highlight two, and someone else might highlight anything over 12%, for example, and I'm making that number up. But smaller companies, we're going to be expecting larger growth rates. Now, as I talk through each of these criteria items, now is where you're going to be like, well, okay, how do I think about the next one and the next one? And what do I do with, what do I do with pre-tax profit and sales? That's where that other webinar comes in. It's not so much about the tool. It's about, how to think about these individual criteria items. So just for grins, I'm going to highlight the top two, 10-year. And let me point out the next one is the historical growth rate for the most recent 5 data points. Well, that's more recent. So that seems attractive to me. You may not want to highlight both 10-year and 5-year. You may only want to, but again, this is where you start looking at, and as you're practicing here, what makes sense to you. I will point out that there is a graph icon on the left. If you're a more visual person rather than a data person, we have some support for you. So this is a graph of the sales data. The data that it's represented is on top here. So this is the historical sales data for this company. And we see the 5 that I've picked. What I would be looking for in general is robust growth and straight, controlled, not all over the map. And I'll tell you what, we have some help for you. If you don't know how to evaluate these data items, we have some educational content on the right that helps you organize your thinking. So if you're unsure about how to think about sales, this may provide a little bit of help for you. So what I want to point out here is these companies are all, I mentioned this before, small, from $300 million in the last fiscal year of sales up until about $943 million. I see that down here on the table. I can also mouse over and see that on this grid. You can see what company goes with what data. That is also available here. I can turn data off in this graph by simply clicking in the table. I was going to call it a legend, but it's really part of the table. So for example, this is the Tyler Technologies data. Remember eGov, which is ticker eGov, NIC. So, full 10 years of data, you can see that things have, for Tyler, have kind of taken off in the last 5 years. For eGov, they're kind of tapering off. So here's a visual representation if that's the way you like to learn. ANSYS, here's their data. We'll see them in pink at the top. We can also see their growth rates for this 10-year time period. Nice Systems and Manhattan Associates. So we see in this view that Manhattan Associates in the last 10 years has had 6.9% growth rate. And if I kind of isolate that, we can see the visual. And what you may note here is they had some choppiness in those first 5 data points, but things are really taking off here. So that's where that later 5 years might be attractive to look at. And sure enough, we see that things are really taking off there. So then we have the data from our study, estimated sales growth rates. So remember that chart I showed you? This is where those numbers come through, just as a reference, so you know what you estimated. Well, if I have done my research so this is going forward numbers, I like the one that provides me the most potential going forward. Then we have the same thing for historical earnings per share. And again, a graph to go along with that. And, we'll see things like a nice in black here was a little choppy recently. We'll see things like ANSYS has been leveling off recently. And we can see that, ANSYS had a 24.7% earnings growth rate over the 10 years, but then more recently it's 10%. So on each row, let me just do the 5-year growth rates. I will pick a couple that seem attractive to me. I like above 20% regardless. And my going forward numbers might, I'll decide which ones I want to pick there. And I'm done with the growth section. Now the concept is you would do that for each of these sections. So we're not going to get into a lot of this detail that I just went through for all of these other rows, because that's where the concepts behind the stock comparison guide come into play. But regardless, you can see that anywhere that we have a graph icon, you'll be able to graph the data. I see a question that I'm going to handle right now. Can you kick out some of the years on the graphs for these 10-year charts? In this view, no. That might be a great place to recommend a future improvement. In your stock selection guide, you can do that, and then it would be reflected here. So I hope that answers that question. So let me kind of walk through this so you can see what I'm going through. So pre-tax profit, in a broad view, I'd like to see that these are as robust as possible. Well, is pretty robust. Well, pre-tax profit and return on equity and debt to capital are sometimes very dependent upon the industry that that these companies operate. So the sixth column that got added in our last update was industry averages. Now it's not populated now. What I need to do is pull down and select the industry that I am concerned with. Now in this view right here, we only have one industry. They're all the same, software applications. So that's an easy pick. And then these are all highlighted in blue to say those are the ones that match the industry averages. Okay, what happens when I add a company in a different industry? So let me take something like eGov out. I'm going to hit that remove button. And I'm going to add, I think I chose Biogen. And we see that's like a large company in the biotech industry. Now my drop down over here says, oh, hey, do you want to show the biotech averages? Okay, well, we can do that. And then that will show me the stock that correlates to what's displayed over here. Or I can go back to the software application ones. And the blue highlighting, or the blue companies, are in the application software. So I hope that's logical at this point. So another thing that you may have noticed is all of a sudden I get a red display up here. And if I mouse over it, as I'm doing now, you can see why. Again, mousing over things is incredibly helpful. And the reason it's red is the price date is more than 7 days old. We have that notification in a number of different places in our tools. So what I should do here is go update that study and then come back. So that, remember my caution that you should have updated data? Well, there's a pretty easy way to do that, and that is I'm going to click on this underlined study name. And when I do that, it's going to open my Biogen study in another tab. And here is my previously created Biogen study. I can see by mousing over the top menu or top title bar that the price date was from February 24th. So I'm going to go up to data and refresh my study data. And I'm just going to update the study data. Now when I look at it, the price date is from April 12th. That's all great. What I need to do now is go back to my study here, or go back to my comparison guide and hit the refresh button. And the updated data will come in. We can see down at the bottom what the price date is. And it has turned from red to black. So let me show you that again. If I take a company out and I add an older company in there, let me do this one. We see that it's red here. If I go down to the bottom, one of my criteria items is price date. And we can see that this is also red. So that's just an indicator. We also see present price in red. That's a little indicator. Hey, you might want to update that. Okay?
Hey, Susie,
Yes.
you're flipping around, and so we got the concept, and that's great because there was a question about that, that if you have something out of date, you have to go back into the SSG,
Right.
and you click on the link to do so. Now we have a follow-up question. How did you get back to the comparison guide after
Okay, because
leaving
I
it?
did that. I did that a little sneaky.
You
Let me
did.
show you. You'll notice in the presentation here, I'm trying to get as much room as possible, so I don't actually have browser tabs showing. Let me press my F11 key and show you my browser tabs. So what happened was, this extra tab opened. So I'm here in my stock comparison guide. I click here. It opens up a new browser tab with that exact study that I am interested in with the older price date. I updated it, and then what I did behind the scenes is simply go back here. So let me do that. Actually, I don't actually want to update this study because it
Something
meant
you want to
something to
keep.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something I want to keep.
Fond memories. Yeah.
Fond memories. Let me add another one that I don't care about.
Pick one of your 500 studies, Susie. You can do
I
it.
know. I don't even know. Right, air lease. Okay. So click on here. It opens it in a different tab so you can take a look. And then my stock comparison guide, you can see the words up here. It's still open. So I'm going to refresh the study data. And if you're confused about what I'm doing in the stock selection guide, that's a different tutorial webinar. So here I have data that's as of last night. I go back to my stock comparison guide.
You did that fast, and
I
for
did.
anybody that was looking, I'm going to point out that actually you just updated the price, not the
I did just
data. Is that what you
correct.
wanted to do?
That's
Okay.
all I wanted to do
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yes.
But there is a
So
way to update the data too, so just for
oh,
people
sure. I could
to
have
know that.
refreshed all of the study data. I have a couple of options here.
Yeah.
I just updated the price to show people that it changes from red to black.
Gotcha.
Now, behind the scenes, what I did, because my buddy Charles told me how to do this, I hit Control Tab, which switches between tabs. Because I didn't have the tab showing, you guys didn't see that. That's all. So most people, and this is, I usually operate with all my tabs showing. So now I'm going to update, and this refresh button, I said I'd get back to that. What it does is kind of reloads the data from your study. That's what it does there. So let me get rid of this guy and re-add, who we're missing, eGov. And we'll continue on. So I've got, a couple of things that I liked about my 5-year sales growth rate. Got some robust estimates here. My 5-year earnings growth rate and a couple of estimates there. And then we were down at pre-tax profit margins. Well, for this industry, pre-tax profit margins on average are 14%. So I've got a couple that are above that. Now, I may want to check the graph here to see if they're steady, growing, sinking, or whatever. But again, Anne's webinar kind of goes into this in a lot more detail. But that's the gist. I'm going to look at return on equity here. Average is 17%, and yet I've got nice systems and ANSYS. They're a little bit below that. Or I could just choose to, highlight the best one, and so forth. Debt to capital. Looks like some of these companies generally have debt, and most of the ones I'm looking at don't, because they're not very capital intensive, and so forth. Each time I highlight, these count up. That's all this counter does, is count the number of green highlights. So the idea is that by selecting, quote unquote, the best on each row, we may see a clear trend towards companies that are more attractive. Now, I will reiterate right now something that Anne was very adamant about in her webinar, and that is quality trumps value. So these top 2 sections are very important. When we start talking about valuation, you'll notice, let me just point out, for example, that we have a couple of companies with a count of 5 and a couple with 2, and lo and behold, the ones that have a count of 2 are actually the ones that are in the buy zone. So companies that look like a great value may only be there because their stock price is down, because there's something not quality about them. And I'm sure Anne said it in a much more elegant way, and that's why you should review her webinar. But we do let you select a a lot of valuation items, like what is the current PE, what is the current, buy, hold, or sell, uh, upside downside ratio, which may present um, less or better odds of the company increasing in value and so forth. We have yield. So if the company pays a dividend, and only one of ours does, you can select from that criteria item, or say it doesn't matter. And then you have potential return as another criteria item. At the bottom, we supply some informational items. So the sector that these are in, I mentioned it, but in case someone forgot, it's right there. We do have a little industry up here, but we also restate it down here. The total sales in the last fiscal year and how we classify that here as size of company. So you can see we range, as I mentioned, from 942 million down to 292 million. The price date from which this information was generated, the last reported quarter, which may be important as we work our way through earnings season here that's coming up, starts this week, I believe. And some companies may have one more quarter reported than others. And again, just a point of information. The last time you made a judgment, in case you were wondering whether your judgments were old, you might want to look at this line. And finally, for the core view, the 25th item is whether or not the company is an ADR. We decided to add this because they report a little differently. They're foreign companies, so you may run into, especially if the ADR pays a dividend, some withholding on that and so forth. So just to have that information out there. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. So those are the basics, and we really feel that these are the basic items. It's a streamlined view of the comparison guide itself. So let's talk about what are all of the criteria items. So if you have a Plus membership or a Plus upgrade and you can access the SSG Plus tool, you will see the Plus SCG button up here, and you will see more criteria items. I'm going to go back and get rid of these browser tabs, and I'm going to flip back and forth slowly here so you can see the difference. On the top left, it says Plus. I'm going to click my button, and we're back to core. Less criteria items. Click the button again, more criteria items. There's 42 criteria items here. And we have, I'll show you a chart at the end. It's also in the handouts, but you will be able to see things like earning stability, which is a statistical measure. We use the R-squared value to represent that. We have more valuation metrics. Now, why are these all here? I'll be frank, because we have a lot of toolkit users that are moving to SSG Plus, a whole lot, and they might be used to seeing these. So there are, you can see how the company's PEs have ranged, and that's what that represents here. The zoning from your study, meaning what is your buy zone, your hold zone, your sell zone, and so forth. Relative value, and that is defined, excuse me, in one of our documents that's under the Help and Information tab. PEG, which is a measure of another valuation metric, again defined in our Help and Information, in a document in our Help and Information tab. Yield, payout, we talked about those before. Another new return item is what some people call PAR, projected average return. It's really a total return based on using a forecast average PE rather than a forecast high PE. It's more conservative. To be frank, I never use it because I like having one frame of reference, and I do a somewhat conservative SSG, no matter what Ann says. Mine are conservative. Hers are more. We have a few more items down here. How many shares outstanding, Insider and institutional ownership, if you don't know what to make of those items, don't worry. There is an old, was a ticker talk item that we did on it, but please do not fret about insider and institutional buys, sells, and ownership. Price date, last reported quarter, those are all the same. We've added the country, so this gives us more information. ADR, which is the American Depository Receipt, means it's a way for a foreign company to have its shares sponsored, usually by a large bank here in the US, and those shares trade like normal other shares on a US exchange. So you don't have to go to an Israeli exchange and buy nice shares. So it's just an arrangement between the company and the exchanges here. So let me show you, I was scrolling down and you can see that floating header now that we have more criteria items. Okay. Are there any outstanding questions, Anne, before I talk about some of the options on the top menu?
No, but, and I'm sure you said it earlier, but maybe we can just reiterate that if you need to be a Plus subscriber to have this view of the SSG Plus, or
Yes.
SCG Plus. So
Right.
a Core subscriber won't even have that little button over to the right. They'll just see
Correct.
it in Core, and that will be good.
Correct. You have a Plus subscription and be able to access the
Either.
SSG
Yeah.
Plus tool and so forth. So
Yeah.
good clarification there. Okay, so let's talk about well, let me answer a question that's coming through. Does the Plus view differ much from Toolkit 6? Yes, I will get to that. There are some additional items, like the 5-year values are totally new and not in Toolkit 6. The ADR indicator, a lot of the other comparison items down here are not available in Toolkit 6. And I believe the earning stability numbers are not in Toolkit 6. So this goes above and beyond what Toolkit 6 had, the Plus view. We felt that there was a lot of noise going on with all of these valuation metrics. That's why we put together the core view. And generally when we teach, we'll be talking about the core view. Would you say that's accurate, Anne?
Yes, we pretty much
Yeah.
stick to the core. And because,
Right.
and I said it in last week's webinar, I really feel that it has all the metrics that we need to do a good
Right.
evaluation.
Right. One preference, while we're talking about core versus plus, let's talk about preferences under tools. And there is a preference that says, I always want to use a streamlined view. And I'm going to, whenever I open a comparison guide, I'm going to go to core. So just be aware that that's there. If you've played around with both, you can just always default. You can still change back, but what that preference setting means is the next time you open the tool, it's just going to default to core. That's all. So you might find that useful. All right, let's talk about a couple of the other options that are on top here, and I'm going to start with notes because we talk about notes sometimes, especially in our Easy Research webinar, and I really want to put it front and center to our audience today in that keeping notes is definitely something that we would recommend. Meaning you're going to go through this work, you're going to talk about it, you're going to evaluate it yourself, or you're going to talk about it in a club setting, and it might be more than you want to have your club secretary write down in your minutes. So you might want to just keep the notes that are very detailed in the study. So I'm going to click on New Note. And it can be anything you want. You can have as many notes as you want. The description here, excuse me, I believe can be 1,000 characters. So you're just going to type in both boxes and then save the note. And it's as simple as that. And if, I can make another new note with some text here and save that note. And now I have 2 notes. I can go back and pick the one I want and delete it. and so forth. I can actually, text. I can resave the note with and update it. So that's all helpful. It will be saved with your saved stock comparison guide. And we have a saved comparison guide. It's being saved automatically for me at this point. The notes will be here when I come back the next time I open it. Now, if you're the type that wants to take a hard copy someplace, you need to know about print. So I'm going to click on print, and we have two options. Just print the basic stock comparison guide or append a note. So if I have notes, I think I'd want to append them. And then I'm going to click generate PDF. It's going to take a few seconds here. I'm going to save that and then open it. And you'll see that I have a colored view of our stock comparison guide with my companies, my highlighting on the first page, the industry averages as I last picked them, and then my notes are on the second page. So that's something you can save an email. It's a nice takeaway for you to take to your club. Was there a question about notes here?
Well, yeah, somebody's asking, maybe it's an organization question about,
Right.
Can you sort the notes by subject?
Oh, you know what? Not at this time, but that's a great idea. So I'm going to show everyone where they can submit great ideas like that and other ones, but we'll take that away as a suggestion for tonight. They're going to display and be self-ordered by date modified, but you know, should you have a bunch of them, and but there's really no sorting going on there.
And you said it's like 1,000 characters, so you could talk about, you could do it by groupings. You could say growth comparison note and make all your notes on growth comparison, and then move on and then keep editing. I mean, that's a way to organize the data.
Yes. So, interesting question here. Can the SS comparison guide be exported to my iClub accounting so it can be shared with members?
Yeah, I'll let you answer that out loud. I was working on an answer right now,
right.
But I'll go, girl.
Not at this time, but that is a great suggestion. Another great suggestion that we'll probably end up implementing is being able to share the whole comparison guide and studies. So that, let's say I want to send this whole schmeal to Anne and say, here's what I did. She would have the comparison guide and all the studies behind it, and there would be no question about, whose numbers are whose, or what data was used, or what price date was used, and so forth. So that is another great suggestion that I've had that seems to make it tons easier. In the SSG tool, you can share studies online, but not yet in the comparison guide tool. And one of our backroom staff made a great comment that you can take that PDF that you generated and share it to the files area or by the email function in my iClub. So that is something that you can do immediately. Okay, so having covered printing and notes and tools, we really, close doesn't much. It closes the tab in some browsers. We have really reached, and covered all of the functionality that the comparison guide does and all the clickable elements. It's pretty simple. Tabular view, add and remove companies, highlight the ones per your criteria, and look at your counts at the top to suggest which ones might be in or out. So before I talk about kind of an alternative way of using this, are there any more questions that I might have missed?
No, I think we're pretty caught up on most everything.
Okay. So quickly, before we go back to our PowerPoint, let me show you what I did to prepare for this webinar. I was in a new comparison, and to get there, so if I'm here where I have a full-blown comparison all flashed out, to do a new one, I'm going to go to this drop down and select New Comparison. And here I have a fresh view. And I didn't have completed studies yet. And one of the capabilities that came along with our latest update is the fact that I can pull in companies without an underlying study. So I ended up doing that. It wasn't, these tickers were not in my list because they weren't a created study yet. So I went to this autocomplete box and said, I want to do a Tyler Technologies study. And I went right down to the bottom and picked Tyler Technologies. I wanted eGov, and instead of picking a created study, I went down and just picked from the bottom of the list. I wanted Manhattan. So, I mean, I literally went through probably 20 different companies to find some that were, together, had characteristics alike. And it turns out the application software industry has a whole lot of choices. So this is how I did it. I took my list and I just started popping them in here. One of the things I wanted to show you here is that I didn't know, what if I didn't know the exact ticker for Manhattan Associates? I just started typing MAN. It will show me all of my options that start with MAN. Nice, and Nice Systems and ANSYS. So this view has some missing data because I haven't made any estimates. So we see a couple dashed lines. I don't know what the upside downside ratio is because I haven't finished it. So they come in as complete as possible, but where there are no judgments, nothing can be established yet. But what I can do in this view, I can look at, like, for example, growth rates that don't excite me, and maybe pre-tax profit margins that don't excite me, and get rid of a company and bring another one in there. And that's how I kind of winnowed down my list. The other thing is, don't forget about the graphs in this scenario, where you can see the data here. It's not the same thing as doing a stock selection guide, but it can be a helpful filter towards narrowing down a list of companies. Also, don't forget that you have the industry averages here they still work as you're narrowing down this list. So when you're looking at, companies to exclude, compare against the industry averages that are over here. So that is another great way of using the tool in preparation for an industry study, so to speak. So with that, I think I've gone through everything that I can in the tool. I am going to go back to our PowerPoint and show you what the rest of we have to show you tonight. I want to reiterate that we have two views in our stock comparison guide now. If you are a Plus user or have a Plus membership, you can see both. If you are a Core member or have the Core tools only, you'll see the Core view, which is frankly not a hardship. This is that streamlined view. And the SSG Plus has 42 criteria items, 10 of which are new. They both have industry averages. They both have the ability to save. This is the only difference. And let's talk about what's new in this tool. So somebody asked the question, what's new above and beyond? Well, this is what's new above and beyond where we had it before. So we've added the 5-year growth rates, we've added the sector and industry averages, or sector and industry names, the study price date, the last reported quarter, the ADR flag, and so forth. So these are in the handouts for you. Earnings stability comes to the table. Relative value and PEG actually are part of the toolkit set, as well as PAR, but they're new to us. And again, if you need more information, check out that Stock Up class. And if you are confused about the whole stock selection guide process in general, So basically creating this study to put in a comparison guide, you have a lot of great resources at your disposal. As a member, you have access to the Introduction to the Stock Selection Guide series, which is 4 webinars, and it's through the My Classes area. We have a national convention where all we do is teach, 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 and the majority of which is our talking about the SSG or subtleties on the SSG or how to evaluate companies, how to tend to your portfolio, and so forth. You may also be interested in a mentor from your local chapter, or maybe there's somebody in your investment club that can help out here. And don't forget the Better Investing magazine, if you're a member, which can, talks about stock selection guide in every single issue. We had a couple of questions tonight that led me to make the comment that that's a great feature request. And here's how you would send in feature requests. You can either go directly to the URL for feedback.betterinvesting.org, or you can go to this Help and Information tab here, and there's a link to the feature request site. We also have an FAQ site that might be able to answer some of the questions that you have. Again, it's available from our Help and Information tab, or by going directly to faq.betterinvesting.org. And we have a couple other upcoming webinars. After our national convention, I will be doing a What's New in Tools wrap-up for our webinar audience. And then June 15th, we're going to do a different kind of webinar where we will have people bring their questions to the table. So if you have any kind of a question, or want to hear what the questions of other people sound like, please come to this webinar. So they will be listed at betterinvesting.org/webinars, or we will always send an email out for future announcements. If you are not getting our emails, please send us a note at service@betterinvesting.org. Likewise, you can call us. Mornings are least busy. You can call or email us about anything else as well. Any questions about the tools or how to order them, or when is your subscription up, and so forth. So are there any final questions, Anne?
I'm pausing because usually when you ask that, that's when they come in, but I'm not seeing any at this point in time.
All right. Well, if anyone has future questions, send them to service@betterinvesting.org. In about a day, you're going to get a follow-up email with the link to the recording. Also, before you leave tonight, there is a survey. So please, please fill out the survey. We need feedback on how we can make our webinars better. I've also added the survey link to the webinar email as well. So we love feedback. We loved having you. And thank you so much to our backroom staff, Charles Bard and Carol Thine, and of course Anne, for hosting this soiree. And hopefully we'll see you all at our next webinar. Thank you and good night.